The Answer, brought to you by Pearshell Financial Group.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and the duly elected congressman from the Houston area, Democrat Al Green. You know him from such interrogations as asking a bunch of banking CEOs if they're all white. Here's Al Green on impeachment. We got to impeach this president to stop him from being reelected.
I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected. If we don't impeach him, he will say he has been vindicated. He will say the Democrats had an overwhelming majority in the House and they didn't take up impeachment. He will say that we had a constitutional duty to do it if it was there and we didn't. He will say that he has been vindicated.
And he'll be right. Wall Street Journal opining on the pseudo-impeachment. Democrats are agonizing over impeachment because while they're itching to do it, Special Counsel Mueller's report blew up their Russian collusion hopes, in addition to taking no position on obstruction. What to do? Democrats have decided to act out a pseudo-impeachment that claims Mr. Trump and his administration are committing offenses against the Constitution without daring to open a formal impeachment inquiry. It's just impeachment theater instead. But there's something else afoot that may turn out to be more than theater. And this was per testimony, not just from Bill Barr last week, but also from FBI Director Christopher Wray on the 2016 investigations and how they all came to be started by one Jim Comey.
I don't know that I can say sitting here today what the predicate is. As you mentioned, the independent inspector general did a fairly intense and rigorous and thorough investigation of that investigation and provided a pretty long report and testified in front of multiple committees of Congress about it. There were a lot of important lessons learned from that, and I think we, the FBI, and I at the helm, took those lessons very much to heart immediately. Some of them we already had in place.
Mr. Director, but I'm going to run out of time, and I don't want to do that. Can you tell me what the factual predicate was for the investigation of President Trump?
Well, the special counsel's report goes through a fair amount of detail about the predication for its investigation. I think beyond that, as I mentioned to the chairman, I've had a number of conversations and I'm working to help the Attorney General get to the bottom of an understanding of what the circumstances surrounding the initiation of that investigation were at the department and the FBI back in 2016.
Kevin Brock, writing in thehill.com. Kevin Brock is former assistant director of intelligence for the FBI. He was a special agent for 24 years and principal deputy director for the National Counterterrorism Center. Writing on Barr/Ray's examination. 3 areas. The first will be whether the investigations to both presidential nominees and the Trump campaign were adequately, in Barr's words, predicated, meaning was there justification. Second, whether Comey's team obeyed longstanding established investigative guidelines while conducting the investigations, if there was sufficient truthful justification for spying, for example. And third, an examination of whether Comey was unduly influenced by political agendas emanating from the previous White House, its DNI, its CIA director, and or its attorney general. As Mr. Brock goes on to say in his piece, this is a good line, Jim Comey sees himself as kind of a pontiff on the Potomac working his beads, but he comes across lately more like an unraveling Captain Queeg working his ball bearings. For more on this topic and others, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Juan Williams, Fox News contributor, also a columnist for The Hill. Juan, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Good morning to both of you.
So, good morning. So, what do you think? Do we have a Comey mutiny on our hands, Juan?
No, I'm fascinated that you are lost in this conspiracy theory. I mean, wow,
What's
you are
the
going down the
conspiracy
hole
theory?
this morning.
What's the
Now,
conspiracy
what is
theory?
all this about? I mean, in fact, what you heard from Christopher Wray, the FBI director, yesterday was when he was directly asked if he has any evidence of any wrongdoing, any spying. He said no. He said he doesn't know anything like that.
Well, that's why they're going to look at it. That's the whole point.
Well, you can look at it,
Yeah, why not?
Again, I don't think that the premise would be that there was something illegal or some kind of conspiracy or political malpractice being done at the FBI or I guess even the CIA. And it's just, to me, if they didn't look into Russian interference in our election,
well, they did,
which has been confirmed by everybody from the intelligence agencies to Mueller, if they didn't say, hey, wait a second, are the Russians trying to penetrate one of the campaigns for president? I think we'd say, hey, FBI, CIA, you're not doing your job.
Well, wait a second. They did look into that. The Obama administration, if anybody, was soft-pedaling the look into Russian interference. But they did look into that. And so what's the big deal? Why so up in arms about Wray and Barr going back and looking at the predicate for all of this?
No, nobody's up in arms. It's just not a big story. But, I mean, again, I think Barr is the one who raised this profile when he said he thought he would look into spying. The use of such a word was very political, as you know, because the president is one that's constantly trying to denigrate our intelligence agencies, put down the FBI, put down Mueller, everybody. And then he says, oh, yeah, you know what? The real point that you guys should be investigating, and Barr wouldn't answer this, go after Hillary. What was going on with Hillary? What was going on with her server? He spreads all of this, what I call gaslighting, all of this confusion and nonsense, and then it gets picked up and people think, oh, there must be something real there.
Well,
Answer,
Juan, you have
nothing.
to look at Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. I mean, their text messages back and forth. Clearly, they were politically motivated. Clearly, they did not like
clearly they
President
didn't
Trump.
like Trump. It doesn't mean they're politically motivated.
But that affects your job. If you feel that way, you're going to be biased in your job. I mean, I don't think they went into their job with open minds.
I mean, Juan, you're aghast at people spreading information that they can't corroborate, but not when it's Adam Schiff or any of the Democrats on the Hill who have been spinning conspiracy yarns for the last 2.5 years that were rejected by Mueller.
Wait a minute. I don't know. I looked at the report and said there were more than 100 instances of contacts between Russians and the Trump campaign.
Uh-huh.
And that what Mr. Mueller found was that there
collusion.
was no evidence of any real, what would you call it, conspiracy?
No collusion.
I think the president calls it collusion.
No, whatever.
But the idea that the Russians not only were in contact with the Trump campaign, but wanted to spread disinformation that would damage Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump, there's just no argument about this.
But that's not what we're arguing. We're arguing that Adam Schiff and Nadler and Maxine Waters, and I could go on, Swalwell and the rest of them. We have evidence of Russian collusion. Said for 2 years. We have evidence. You want me to play you the clips? We have evidence. He did it. We're going to present the evidence at the appropriate time. No evidence. Mueller did a 2-year investigation. No collusion. And you still can't bring yourself to admit what is in black and white in the Mueller report. It's remarkable to me.
Well, you just said no evidence, and I think that's where you go over the line, because you and I, as journalists, we know, that, of course, about the Trump Tower meeting with the Russian lawyer who had promised information on Hillary Clinton. We know that, in fact, what you get is people breaking down the Hillary Clinton campaign, hacking them and then feeding it to WikiLeaks and Assange and all that.
Well, what do you think Hillary Clinton's campaign was doing to Trump's campaign? I mean, they're not
just
sitting
that's
by.
not
There's
the conversation.
research
Dan just said to me, there's nothing. There's no evidence.
There
and I'm
isn't.
just telling you, just off the top of my head, the evidence.
I'm sorry.
Again, the key point is that Mueller found no conspiracy or collusion.
Yes, and the entire raison d'etre of the congressional Democrats for the last 2 years was he is a Russian agent. He is committed. I'm sorry, because that's specifically what was said. They have accused him of committing treason, and the whole point of the Mueller investigation is has there been a crime committed? And all the Democrats suggested there had been, and there was evidence for it. And Bob Mueller said, no, there isn't. And they can't
Correct,
admit it.
especially with regard to conspiracies. Doesn't mean there's no evidence of conspiracy.
Oh, my
there's
gosh.
lots of that.
Talk about
he just
parsing
decided
words.
it was not sufficient. And on obstruction, boy, it's a whole different story. He just said he didn't want to come to a conclusion, but he said he cannot clear the president.
Okay, well, no, I know. Again, I mean, I'm all for it. I mean, keep pressing this argument. I hope, like Al Green does too, and I hope they move to impeach him. I mean, I think it's fantastic.
It's interesting. I think the impeachment move among some on the Democratic side actually fires up the Trump base. I think that you guys think this is great. You know, they're trying to vilify our hero, but
not my hero. He's just the president.
I think Nancy Pelosi's playing it right. Let's just see where it goes. And of course, you can do things like request the president tax returns.
Sure.
And as we saw in the New York Times this morning, somebody's up to playing games and tricks here.
Well, I'm sorry. How's that?
The guy lost billions of dollars over 10 years. He's supposed to be such a rich man. He's going to help our economy. He's going to help us. We're going to win so much. We're going to get tired of losing. He's so wealthy. He knows how to make money. I don't think so.
So
our economy is thriving right now, and
Yeah,
he
that
has
is
help.
actually
And he,
happening.
you know, that happened. It was
Or
from
is it not?
1985 to 1984.
1994.
1994. Excuse me. That was decades ago. And
Well-
we knew because he filed for bankruptcy. I was not surprised by that New York Times report at all.
Yeah, I remember reading that New York Times story out yesterday in Art of the Deal 30 years ago. I mean, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? So Trump doesn't have money?
Oh, no, I didn't say that, but I said essentially what he does is he says these things that are just not true. When they turn out to be found to be not true, people who support him then say, well, so what?
Well, wait a
We
second.
knew that.
He had a bad decade. He memorialized it in a book called Art of the Deal, but there's no question that he's a billionaire. So that means I guess he's been more successful than not. Not a lot of people are billionaires. So I'm sorry, what is the criticism exactly? What is the indictment here?
The indictment is that he lied about it. I mean, this is so constant. I mean, and don't forget, this is a guy that was given millions by his father. I mean, it's been said that if he had just invested the money, if he had never done any business, he'd be richer today than he is now because he did go into business.
Well, speaking of tax returns, what do you think about these moves at the state level, including here in Illinois, to try to prevent Trump from being on the ballot in 2020 if he doesn't release, in the case of Illinois, 5 years of tax returns? What do you think about that?
I think it's political. I mean, obviously, I don't think there's an exception. If you go all the way back to Eisenhower, presidents released their tax returns. But at this point, it's all politics, and it's all an attempt, again, I think, to embarrass Trump for his, inexplicable until now, maybe he just doesn't want people to know what a failure he was at business. So, but it doesn't make sense. What's he
successful
hiding?
Business people fail at some point in time. But, all right, so the 2020, what Democratic candidate do you think could unseat President Trump?
Well, if you just look at the polls, and that's all I have to go on right now, obviously Joe Biden can do it. But similarly, I was surprised that the Sanders, Buttigieg, they all can beat Trump. I think like Harris, others are like tied with Trump. But I mean, it's pretty clear on the Democratic side right now, there's a tremendous surge of interest in Joe Biden, financial surge of interest. The polls have him way up. So it's quite kind of interesting because he's going to have to go through some tough waters on the Democratic side to win the nomination. But for right now, the Democratic base, I think, is surprising a lot of people. It's not far left. It's not socialist. It's interested in an older white male named Joe Biden.
Well, yeah, for now. I mean, it's partly an AIM-ID thing, and an older white male named Bernie Sanders, too, as you point out. But that's what my question for you is, how does Joe Biden get out of that primary? Because people are focusing on the national poll, and as you know, it's not a national election. It's a state-by-state election, and if you look at the polls in Iowa and New Hampshire, he's in a dead heat, Biden is, with Bernie Sanders and others not too far behind. So, and that's what really matters, momentum in Iowa, New Hampshire, and then forward. So do you think Joe Biden has the staying power to go the distance?
Well, I think he's been through it and lost twice. So my sense is he knows what he's getting into, and you know, Donald Trump is a political phenomenon of our times. So you would have to, getting into this, be understanding that you are going to go up against a candidate who's not only a tremendous personality, but has the advantage of incumbency. You got to give him the advantage going into this race. And I would imagine Joe Biden's not stupid enough to think, oh, this is going to be some cakewalk. But as you point out, I think he's first got to get through the Democratic primary, and that's going to be tough too, because I can hear a lot of people who are going to be pulling on him from the left and saying, you know, what happened with Anita Hill? What happened with tax reform? What happened with criminal justice reform? All these questions are out there, and they're all going to be stumbling blocks in the way of Joe Biden.
He is Juan Williams, Fox News contributor, columnist for thehill.com. Juan, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Purchase a foursome at the AM 560 golf outing to support the families of fallen first responders. Call 312-363-6680. That's 312-363-6680.